The morning started with a scream, not from a person, but from my prize cow, Bessie. And I mean scream. I've heard her moo when she's hungry, I've heard her bellow when she's birthing, but I had never, in all my years on a ranch, heard a cow scream like a dying banshee in a horror film. I dropped my coffee, bolted out the front door, and sprinted toward the pasture in nothing but boots and boxers, thinking maybe a coyote had slipped past the fences. What I found instead: Bessie, trembling, with a black scorch mark singed into her side, and an electric cattle prod lying in the dirt. She wasn't near the electric fence. There was no storm. No burn from wires or gear malfunction. Just one very deliberate burn in the shape of a rod. And that prod, dusty, slightly bent, but unmistakably mine. Except I hadn't seen it in 2 weeks. I stared at Bessie, who stared back with the wet, betrayed eyes of a creature that didn't understand why someone would hurt her. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. And around here, when messages are sent with weapons, that message tends to come from one place: Crescent Oaks HOA. Let me explain something about HOA President Karen Billingsley. She wears pastels like a preacher's wife, but has the soul of a Bond villain. She once fined a guy for having aggressively shaded trees. She yanked a child's lemonade stand off a sidewalk for commercial zoning violations. She walks around our mixed agriculture neighborhood like she owns every blade of grass. Unfortunately, when it comes to power, she kind of does. Thanks to a rulebook thicker than a tractor manual and a board full of scared retirees who nod at whatever she says. But this time, she went too far. This time, she poked the wrong cow. And as fate would have it, she also poked the wrong rancher, because I may be wearing boots now, but I used to wear a badge. The first thing I did was limp back into the house, cold wind on bare legs, coffee drying on the porch, and pull up the security footage from last night. I hadn't checked it in weeks, but I thanked Past Me for installing thermal cameras after a coyote scare last fall. I fast-forwarded to 2:14 a.m. There she was. A blur at first, moving past the fence, holding something long and metallic in one gloved hand. She crept like a burglar, in slippers. Then I got the face. Clear as day. Karen. Pausing dramatically before jabbing Bessie, who reared back and fell to her knees. Karen looked satisfied. Left the prod behind like it was beneath her. Then strutted off through the moonlight as if she'd just solved a national security threat. My hands clenched the edge of the table so hard I nearly cracked it. I was halfway into my jeans when I heard the mailbox clang. Sure enough, a crisp HOA violation notice fluttered on the front lawn like a paper grenade. The offense? Unmanaged livestock vocalizations causing auditory pollution in the residential sector. Translation: Bessie mooed. My cow mooed. On my land. At night. And someone electrocuted her over it. Now, I could have gone over there right then, still shirtless, carrying the prod like a sword, and had it out with her. But that's not how I operate. I spent 15 years as an undercover cop in Dallas. Patience and timing make better weapons than fists and fury. So instead, I calmly brewed another cup of coffee, sat on my porch with a notepad, and began planning Karen's downfall like it was a tactical mission. Because it was. The neighborhood of Crescent Oaks is a strange hybrid of manicured suburb and working ranch. On one end, you've got people growing lavender for Etsy shops. On the other, folks like me raising livestock and trying to keep coyotes from making off with a goat leg. The HOA rules are designed to make the place look like a Pinterest board, but the reality is messier. Still, Karen acts like she's the empress of the entire zip code. She's always had it out for me ever since I refused to paint my barn a softer beige, to match the townhomes 3 lots down. That was strike 1. Strike 2 was when she tried to fine me for offensive haystack shapes. Strike 3 was this. I knew going to animal control wouldn't do squat. Karen practically hosts tea with them. But the sheriff's office? They still knew me. Hell, I taught half the force how to shoot straight. So I made a quiet call. Explained the situation. Left out the part about me wanting to throw Karen into the compost pile. They said they'd look into it. Which in small-town speak means, unless she tossed your cow on live television, we're staying out of it. Fine. That night, I did 2 things. 1. I locked up every tool, weapon, and piece of gear tighter than Fort Knox. 2. I drove to a hardware store in the next county and bought motion sensors, trail cams, and enough night vision tech to make a SWAT team jealous. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was about to show her what real surveillance looked like. The next morning, the neighborhood gossip app lit up like a Christmas tree. Karen had posted a blurry video titled, "Rogue Cow Threatens Residential Peace." The footage showed Bessie walking near the road, minding her own business, but Karen narrated it like it was a military operation. "Here we see the beast again," she said, voice calm and robotic, encroaching dangerously close to community flower beds. No response to warnings. Aggressive mooing intensifies. People laugh. But some people agreed with her. One even commented, "Is that the same cow that attacked my poodle last summer?" Another said, "We need a livestock curfew." And just like that, the lines were drawn. I didn't respond. I just smiled, because Karen had no idea who she'd just declared war on. See, I left the badge behind to live a peaceful life. Raise cows. Fix fences. Drink too much coffee on my porch while watching the sunrise. But I'm still that guy when pushed. And Karen? She didn't just push. She zapped my cow and told the world it was justified. So now I'm building a case. Not just for Bessie, but for everyone Karen's bullied, fined, and harassed in the name of community standards. The cameras are rolling. The files are stacking. And Karen's walking around like she's untouchable. But that's the thing about people who think they're above the rules. They forget some of us used to write them. By the time the weekend rolled around, Karen had turned my quiet corner of Crescent Oaks into a bureaucratic war zone. I woke up to another HOA citation. This one slipped under my front door like a ransom note. It accused Bessie of violating Section 14.3, non-human residents disrupting visual cohesion of the neighborhood. I had to read it 3 times before I realized she was calling my cow an eyesore. Apparently, Bessie's natural pattern didn't align with the approved earth tone animal aesthetics laid out in the newly updated HOA bylaws. I didn't even know that was a thing. Karen had typed it up and printed it on embossed stationery, complete with an HOA seal that looked suspiciously like her own face turned into a logo. But it wasn't just paper threats anymore. She was escalating. 2 houses down, Old Man Henderson said Karen popped by with a tape measure to ensure his lawn met sunlight symmetry standards. A teen girl got fined for wearing Crocs on HOA grounds. And when my niece Maya came over to visit, she was warned by Karen's assistant not to loiter near livestock with an open soda because it might encourage the animals to develop urban behavior. I thought that was a joke until I saw the assistant had body cam footage. She actually wears a chest cam, says it helps with liability. Then came the drone. It started with a soft buzzing outside the barn window like a mosquito on steroid. I thought one of the neighbor's kids had gotten a new toy. But it wasn't a toy. This thing was sleek, black, and bore a Crescent Oaks emblem right on the side. It hovered above Bessie for nearly 5 minutes, scanning her like a sci-fi cattle probe. Bessie tried to swat at it with her tail, and I swear the drone backed up like it was dodging. A few minutes later, I got an HOA notice by email. Cow observed near sidewalk perimeter. Please keep livestock within approved walking radius. That was it. I was done playing nice. I brought Maya into the fold. She's 16, smarter than a dozen engineers, and knows her way around a keyboard like I know my way around a pair of boots. When I showed her the drone footage, her eyes lit up like she'd just been handed the final boss in a video game. She cracked into the drone's feed within 10 minutes flat. What we found was a full directory of HOA surveillance logs, all stored in a cloud folder titled Karen's Eyes. There were files for every house on the block. Names, timestamps, behavior violations, lawn analysis reports, even charts comparing garden gnome sizes. She had ratings next to everyone's name, like some twisted Yelp system. The kicker? There was a folder named Cow Watch. Inside were over 20 clips of Bessie. Eating. Mooing. Sitting. Mooing again. Karen had notes on her like a zookeeper. One said, cow blinked 42 times between 7 to 8 p.m. Possible stress. Investigate. Another, tail movement erratic. May be conspiring with geese. I didn't know whether to laugh or start yelling. But we had what we needed. Now it was my turn to watch her. I dug out the scarecrow from my garage, hollowed its head, and stuffed a camera inside. From a distance, it looked like your average corny farm prop. Up close, it was a surveillance device with a wide-angle lens and night vision. I placed it right by the edge of the property line facing the road. Next, I hid a second camera inside a plastic flamingo in the flower bed. Karen loved flower beds. She couldn't resist peeking at other people's hydrangeas. Over the next 3 days, I built a digital file thicker than a legal thriller. I caught Karen sneaking onto another neighbor's porch to reposition a welcome mat. Saw her shaking her head disapprovingly at someone's Christmas lights, even though it was March. I got her trimming a rosebush that didn't belong to her. She didn't even live on that block. She was just pruning for aesthetic safety. Then came the final straw. On Wednesday, during an HOA meeting I wasn't invited to, Karen announced a new policy. Any livestock producing sounds above 3.5 decibels during evening hours would be deemed a Class B nuisance entity and subject to relocation. In layman's terms, she was trying to evict my cow. I showed up anyway. She held the meeting on her lawn, chairs arranged in a semicircle like it was some kind of cult gathering. Her followers, mostly the same 6 neighbors who owed her favors or feared her fines, sat fanning themselves with HOA pamphlets. I walked right up to the group holding a printed-out transcript of her drone logs and asked one simple question. Karen, do you know it's a federal offense to spy on private property using surveillance equipment without permission? The way she froze, you'd think I told her the moon was falling. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she snapped, trying to wave me off. This is community enforcement. Community enforcement doesn't include recording through people's windows, I said calmly. Especially not minors. Like Maya here. I motioned, and Maya stepped forward holding her laptop. One click, and Karen's feed started playing on the screen. An innocent family dinner, a woman watering her plants in her robe, a teenage boy dancing badly in his living room. The crowd murmured. Karen tried to grab the laptop. Maya pulled it back with ninja reflexes. You've been spying on everyone, I continued. Not just Bessie. Everyone. For what? Lawn length? Plant height? Cow moods. Don't be dramatic, Karen said. I was only doing what was necessary to maintain order. This neighborhood needs structure. It needs boundaries, I snapped. And not just the ones on your decorative HOA map. She scoffed, stepping up close. You think you're clever, don't you? Just because you were a cop. No, I said, leaning in. I know I'm clever. Because while you were playing petty tyrant, I was building a case. She rolled her eyes and turned to her flock. This man is delusional. I'm initiating a vote to ban livestock within Crescent Oaks entirely. Effective next month. All in favor. But before she could raise her hand, someone else did. Mrs. Martinez. Then Mr. Kemp. Both people Karen had fined in the past. They stood up, quiet but firm. And they weren't alone. Turns out, Karen's iron grip had been slipping while she was too busy chasing cows. People were fed up. With the surveillance. The ridiculous rules. The fake emergencies. The fines over flamingos and fence paint. I'd just given them a reason to stand up. Karen stormed off, muttering something about legal action and reclaiming the dignity of the HOA. But I knew that look. I'd seen it on crooks caught red-handed. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Later that night, I checked my scarecrow cam. At 2:03 a.m., the screen lit up. Karen. Back on my property. Only this time, she wasn't holding a prod. She was holding bolt cutters. The bolt cutters glinted under the moonlight like they were forged specifically for mischief. Karen crept forward, slow and deliberate, like a cat in a rose-patterned bathrobe. My scarecrow cam captured every step as she tiptoed across the property line, her slippers flattening my alfalfa sprouts. She paused just shy of the pasture gate, glanced around dramatically, completely unaware she was being recorded from 3 angles, and then began snipping at the padlock like she was breaking into a high-security vault. 1, 2, 3 clinks and the lock dropped. Karen pushed the gate open, and for a moment she just stood there, watching Bessie. It was eerie. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood, breathing heavily, staring at the cow like she was sizing up an enemy. Then she pulled something from her pocket. A brand new cattle prod. I was already halfway out the door before she raised it. But by the time I got to the pasture, Karen was gone. Bessie was safe, untouched, but clearly spooked. She paced nervously, snorting at the ground, her ears twitching like she'd sensed the threat even if it hadn't landed. I found the broken lock in the dirt and one of Karen's slippers caught in the fence wire. It was embroidered with her initials, KB, in pink cursive. I picked it up, held it for a second, and let out a slow breath. She had escalated again, and this time, she had crossed the criminal line. I wasn't just a disgruntled rancher now. I was a witness, and she was officially trespassing with intent to harm. I didn't bother calling animal control. They were still nursing bruised egos from the footage Maya leaked last week. Instead, I dialed the local sheriff's office and asked for Deputy Wallace. He was a rookie back when I used to teach tactical entry, but now he ran the night patrol. When I told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes, we were walking my pasture, shining flashlights and bagging evidence. The prod hadn't been used, thank God, but her prints were all over it, and we had video, audio, and even her lost slipper. Wallace whistled when I showed him the footage. He turned to me with a grin and said, "I thought you came out here to live the quiet life, man." "Yeah, well," I said, "quiet's overrated when someone's electrocuting your livestock." He promised to get a warrant for a formal warning, maybe even a restraining order, but I wasn't betting on it doing much. Karen was too slippery, too smug, and too sure she was above everyone else. No piece of paper was going to stop her. She needed to be publicly unmasked, discredited. She needed the kind of blow that her pastel reputation couldn't survive. The next day, I met with Sergio at the feed store cafe. He was munching on a breakfast burrito the size of a saddle and had 2 cell phones buzzing nonstop with local tip. Sergio used to work the city news beat but moved back home for peace and small-town scandal, as he called it. I handed him a flash drive with everything Maya and I had collected. The drone footage, the surveillance logs, the HOA manipulation, and now the bolt cutter incident. He scrolled through the files in silence, his eyes widening with every clip. "She's running for county commissioner," he said after a long pause, tapping a video of Karen circling Bessie like a vulture. "She's going to implode if this gets out." "That's the idea," I said. "But I don't want to just leak this. I want her exposed with context. I want the people to see what she's done to this whole neighborhood, not just my cow." Sergio grinned. "So we go big. We called it Operation Karen Storm. It started small. A few anonymous tips sent to the Crescent Oaks Community Forum. Short video clips showing Karen harassing the mailman about package alignment, arguing with a 4th grader about a chalk drawing, and sneaking into a neighbor's yard to rearrange lawn ornaments because they interfered with the neighborhood's chakra. The forum lit up. People laughed at first. Then they remembered the fines, the citations, the shame letters. But the real strike came on Saturday afternoon. We hosted an event called MooFest. It was supposed to be a joke at first, something to lift neighborhood morale. But it turned into something far bigger. We set up hayrides, games for kids, booths with free lemonade, and a tent with fresh milkshakes courtesy of Bessie and her new calf, Buttercup. Maya made shirts that read Free Bessie and badges shaped like tiny cowbells. People came out in droves, half the community piling onto my ranch, just to stick it to Karen. Local news showed up with cameras. Sergio gave interviews. Even the mayor made an appearance, saying, "It's nice to see democracy done with dairy." Right in the middle of MooFest, while a local bluegrass band played a song about rogue lawn gnomes, Bessie gave birth. Right there in front of dozens of people. Buttercup arrived in a flurry of hooves, squeals, and an applause so thunderous it scared the chickens into laying a week's worth of eggs in 10 minutes. Kids gathered to watch the miracle, and the moment was beautiful, pure, and completely ruined 30 seconds later when Karen burst through the crowd with a megaphone screaming, "This is an unlicensed livestock event. This birth is unauthorized." She held up a printed ordinance and tried to cite the cow for giving birth within 50 feet of a public gathering. People started booing. A toddler threw a juice box at her. Karen swatted it away like it was radioactive. She shouted something about legal action and birthing zones, but nobody listened. She turned to leave, her cheeks red with rage, only to slip on a stray patch of mud, land on her hands and knees, and get splattered by one of Buttercup's very first digestive contributions to the world. The crowd erupted in laughter. Phones were out. Videos were everywhere. Karen stood, covered in karma, and stormed away without another word. But that wasn't the end. That night, while everyone else was uploading footage of the MooFest meltdown, Sergio uncovered something even juicier. While digging through the HOA's financial records, which had recently become public thanks to Karen's political ambitions, he found multiple payments from HOA funds funneled into a personal campaign account. There were expenses labeled as community beautification consulting that actually paid for her personal landscaping, bribes to her assistant, misreported drone costs. It was fraud. Clear as daylight. With timestamps, signatures. Sergio looked at me with the same glint I'd seen in cops right before they made an arrest. "She's done," he said. I nodded, but didn't smile. Not yet. Because I knew people like Karen didn't go down quietly. I was right. The next morning, I found a threatening letter taped to my gate. Handwritten. No signature. Just one sentence. "Cows can disappear too." I stared at it for a long time, the words burning into my head like a brand. Then I walked inside, locked the doors, loaded my cameras, checked my backup power, and told Maya it was time to go full lockdown. Because if Karen thought she'd seen the worst of me, she hadn't seen anything yet. The note didn't scare me. It pissed me off. I wasn't worried about Karen sneaking onto the property again with a cloak and dagger routine. I was worried she'd get someone else to do her dirty work. Someone desperate enough to take her side for a favor, or dumb enough to believe her twisted version of reality. That's why I spent the next 2 days sleeping in short shifts with a thermal scope next to my bed, a thermos of coffee in my hand, and the live feed from all 6 surveillance cameras projected onto my living room wall. Maya turned the entire system into a command center, complete with motion alerts, AI threat detection, and a few surprise sound traps that played Angry Goose honking if anyone breached the fence line. The ranch was basically Fort Knox now, if Fort Knox had cows and a grudge against HOA tyranny. The day of the HOA disciplinary hearing was sunny and oddly quiet. Almost too quiet. I arrived in full uniform, retired or not, my commission still allowed me to wear the badge for formal civic matters. I hadn't done that in years. The moment Karen saw me step onto the community clubhouse patio with that silver star clipped to my chest, her face went white. She was surrounded by her loyalists, all of them dressed like they were going to a garden brunch, not a confrontation. But something had shifted in the past week. The others weren't smiling like usual. There was tension. Whispers. A few of them looked at me and nodded, small, secret acknowledgments that told me they weren't so loyal anymore. Karen tried to take control immediately, banging her decorative gavel on the makeshift podium like it owed her money. We will now begin the formal review of the rancher's ongoing violations against community guidelines, she declared, including unauthorized livestock births, drone tampering, and defamation of the HOA. Her voice was sharp, shaky underneath the surface, like a violin string stretched too tight. Before we start, I said calmly, I'd like to submit evidence of criminal misconduct by the HOA president. Gasp. Literal gasp. Someone dropped their iced tea. Karen laughed, but it was a weird, choked sound, like she hadn't prepared for this moment. Mr. Rourke, this is not a courtroom. You're right, I interrupted. Because if it were, you'd already be in handcuffs. But since this is an official meeting governed by civic charter, it's bound by law. And I have plenty of that to share. I turned and nodded to Maya, who was standing behind a folding table with a laptop, projector, and an air of theatrical flair that made me proud and slightly nervous. She clicked a key, and suddenly the projector hummed to life, casting the HOA clubhouse wall in bright resolution. First image. Karen with the cattle prod mid-strike paused in glorious 1080p. Next image. Her creeping through my gate with bolt cutters. Then video clip. One after another. Drone footage. HOA surveillance logs. Audio clips of Karen boasting about manipulating votes, rerouting funds, and falsifying community complaints to target specific household. People gasped again. This time louder. Sergio, seated 2 rows back with a notepad, whispered something to the reporter beside him. The story was already spreading. Karen stepped forward, visibly trembling now. This is a violation of privacy, she spat. He hacked into private files, he manipulated footage, he's conducting a smear campaign against an elected official. Correction, I said. You misused HOA resources to fund a personal political campaign. You violated at least 3 surveillance laws. And you assaulted my cow. I pulled out the prod, now in an evidence bag, and laid it on the table like a trophy. And just so we're clear, I continued, voice low and steady, you also sent a threat to my home. Cows can disappear too, remember? I still have the note. Karen's mask cracked. For a split second, the calm, condescending queen of Crescent Oaks vanished, and underneath was something raw and furious. She lunged forward like she was about to tear the projector from the wall, but tripped on the power cord instead and landed flat on her back. The entire room went silent. Then, someone, probably Mrs. Martinez, snorted. The snort turned into a laugh. Then another. And suddenly, half the HOA members were trying not to giggle while Karen lay sprawled next to a potted fern, staring at the ceiling like it had betrayed her. She scrambled to her feet, eyes blazing. You people are sheep. You don't know what's best for this community. I've sacrificed everything to make this place beautiful, and you'd rather listen to a cowboy and his mooing mutt of a cow. That was the final straw. The crowd turned on her. A chorus of disapprovals rang out. You assaulted an animal. You spied on my kids. You fined me for wearing flip-flops. Someone actually threw a croissant. Karen ducked and bolted out the back door, swearing vengeance and threatening lawsuits like a villain in a melodrama. But it was over. Her reign had collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance and my carefully timed counterattack. 2 weeks later, she was formally removed as HOA president in a vote that was almost unanimous. The only person who voted for her was her assistant, and even she looked embarrassed about it. The county commissioner campaign folded. Her surveillance drones were grounded. The HOA bylaws were rewritten to prohibit personal vendettas disguised as community oversight, and a new clause was added. No member may approach or touch livestock without the owner's consent. Maya named it the Bessie Clause. It passed with applause. Karen moved out shortly after that. Rumor has it she took up residence in a condo complex 20 miles away where the biggest concern is whether someone's doormat is too whimsical. Good riddance. As for me, I got offers. A few people wanted me to run for HOA president, others joked about a county office run. I turned them all down. I'm a rancher now. I've got hooves to clean, fences to mend, and a cow named Bessie who's become something of a local celebrity. She got her own page in the town paper. Buttercup got a parade float. And I, for the first time in years, could sit on my porch in peace, sip my coffee, and know the pasture was safe. Maya went on to create an app that lets neighbors report HOA nonsense anonymously. She called it MOO, Mutual Oversight Operation. Sergio wrote a 3-part expose titled The Queen of Crescent Oaks and the Cow Who Fought Back. The last article ended with a quote from me that I barely remember saying, but he swore it was real. Sometimes, the only thing standing between tyranny and freedom is a cow, a camera, and someone who knows how to fight clean. And that's the story of how Karen shocked the wrong cow and didn't realize the rancher was an off-duty cop with a good memory, a strong Wi-Fi signal, and absolutely no patience for HOA nonsense.